Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, we have our second part of our interview with Dr. Shannan Palma, as Dr. Palma joins us to discuss helpful sensory tools and the social construct of gender. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. So, I wanted to talk about the Autistic Self Reliance Support Network and kind of what you do, which is listening to autistic people and understanding our needs and then working with researchers to find solutions. Where are you in this process, and what type of support do you need to continue to make these goals a reality?
Oof. Well, we have two organizations. We started the Autistic Self-Reliance Support Network, which is a 501c3. That's a nonprofit for the non-US folks, and it's a social impact organization. So that is our goal, is to provide direct services to autistic adults. And when I say direct services, I mean like coaching on how to use transportation and like figuring out to your specific needs, or a call center where we hire people who are disabled but who like to talk on the phone and who can help us with calls and things like that. So like sort of cross disability solidarity to provide direct services. And then also we want to flip the power dynamic in autism research so that the $4 billion autism industry that is focused on caretakers and on cures instead focuses on just like, hey, it would be great if so many autistic people didn't try to kill themselves. Wouldn't that be nice? Like, that's something we could impact very, very easily, I think. But nobody's trying. Instead, they're trying to like figure out what the autism gene is so they can eliminate it, right? So we want to flip that and really say, there are 1% of the global population is autistic. Instead of trying to eliminate us, could you just help us? And if you're not going to help us, we'll help ourselves. So we decided the best way to fund this, and this is a problem with any kind of self-advocacy, is nonprofits have to survive for about 5 years before like grant funders and things like that will take us seriously and give us money, which means that either you're independently wealthy, which, not something that really is a thing with the autistic population, most of us at least, or you're doing it in your spare time as volunteers, in addition to however else you're living your life, right? Or earning your living or doing whatever. And we're a community that already struggles with meeting basic obligations and needs. We have very limited energy. We founded the nonprofit and we realized if we're going to make services available to the autistic community for free, then what we need to do is we need a sustainable funding source. So we started a social enterprise subsidiary. So that's a for-profit company that's a tech company focused on making assistive technology. And we went to this social enterprise incubator thing called Give Back Hat, and we won first prize. And we assembled a team, all neurodivergent, majority autistic, full stack developers, user experience experts, business analysts. Like, we've got a team of 8 now, all working on this, and we're all doing it in addition to our other things. And we won first prize in the competition. So like, we've got some backing from the Columbus community in terms of resources. And then we got $7,500 to put towards paid user testing. So we created a minimal viable product and did some user surveys. So Ways people can help. Well, first of all, the first product that we're doing, we're creating something called the Armory Weapons for Life, weapons for life, not against life. And it's a series of interconnected single-use applications or single-task applications to help with common autistic challenges. And the first one we were going to do was the two that rose to the top were like finishing multi-step tasks and making decisions. And then we actually started on the task one because we thought that would be the easier lift. And then when we did our user research, we found out that what autistic people desperately want is something to help with decision paralysis and decision fatigue. So we switched to that one. And our AI guy, he came up with like the prompts to be able to use large language models to help with getting effective decisions based on providing a little bit of context about the moment in which you're making the choice. We have our proof of concept, and now we're getting ready to launch a crowdfunding campaign and also to do a bunch of additional user research, and we're building that first decisions app. So things that support we need is, signing up for our mailing list for the Autistic Self-Reliance Support Network and filling out user experience surveys when we go out, spreading the word on that, signing up for our Indiegogo campaign launch page, because we have to find 1,000 people to be on our mailing list because it's the first 24 hours that matter the most in a crowdfunding campaign. There are all these little tiny logistical things that we're doing. And the goal is to create apps that will really materially impact the lives of autistic people and increase well-being. Their secondary goal is to create the largest pool of data on the autistic lifespan ever and have it be owned by autistic people, have users own their own data. And that way, when researchers want to study us, they have to get our buy-in. It's kind of a coup. It's a super nerdy, very quiet coup that requires everybody, if autistic people don't get on board, it's not going to work. So that is actually very comforting to all of us, because we're like, oh, at least we won't do anything that's harmful, because if autistic people don't want it, they won't do it, and it won't work, and that'll be fine. But we think that it's a good strategy, and I mean, we're tired of autistic people dying. The suicide rate is ridiculous. I just actually was pulling it up for a description of why is it important that we have these apps. And a Danish study found that autistic people were 3 times more likely to try to kill ourselves as non-autistic people. And for autistic women, the risk is 8 times as high. And in general, autistic people 4 times more likely to succeed in killing ourselves. Why are we not? Why are we not focused on this?
So I wanted to ask you about a webinar you hosted not too long ago. I guess to give some background, you have a PhD in gender and sexuality studies, and you hosted a webinar how everything we're taught about sexuality and gender are wrong, which I love. One of the key points that you brought up is that we don't always know if we're experiencing desire, and a result, how we can act on it if we don't know. That seems pretty challenging. What might be some ways you think that could be helpful to us as autistic people to more effectively understand our desires and other emotions that we may be experiencing within the context of sexuality and gender?
Oof. This is one of those ones where I studied it for years and I taught classes and I did all this, and then all of a sudden the light bulb went off and I was like, because I never quite saw myself in anything. And when you're teaching, when you're immersed in theories of human sexuality, and you're like, well, just weird. It's a strange, like, I accept that, but also like everybody's weird, everybody's different. But the only just like rationalizations I could find for like not understanding whether you're experiencing desire or not were all trauma related. They weren't physiological. And I'm like, but what if there's no trauma? I don't understand. One of the things that became clear for me was that sometimes, so like autistic people, we tend to have problems with interoception. So or challenges around it. And it's a spectrum. It can be, everything from like, I have an atypical pain response. Like I drove myself to the urgent care with a broken foot once because I was just like, purple, it's probably bad, like I should go see a doctor. But it wasn't that kind of throbbing, like acute pain that you see on TV. So I'm supposed to be screaming if my foot is broken, not looking at it and thinking, that looks weird. So interoception it can be something like that. It could be also not being able to interpret when we're hungry or tired, not having the signals, the neurological signals from the body go to the brain and be translated to tell us what we need. It can be going to the bathroom, things like that. So one thing about that is, yes, sometimes those challenges can be hardwired and a part of our unique neurology, but also they're learned too, because most of us have to block interoception as a survival mechanism when, like, the most popular treatment, quote unquote, for autism is ABA. Like, that is a system of rewards and punishments for enacting behavior and ignoring your body, like enacting desired behaviors at the expense of your own comfort. So when we're teaching children to ignore their bodies, and then they grow up to be adults, and part of sexuality is listening to your body and being aware of your body, there's a twofold problem. So there is a hardwired challenge, and then there's also a learned challenge. So you got to kind of tackle both. But in terms of like what to do when you already have the problem and you're like, well, that's nice, know where it comes from, but I don't know what to do about it. I think what I find very helpful is anything that reconnects the brain and the body. And some of that can be like yoga, martial arts, various kink practices. Shibari is one. It's like a Japanese art of rope tying, and that's kind of incorporating mindfulness into sexuality. And those are things that just anything that makes your brain and your body kind of sync back up so that they're existing in the same time. And then also just on a regular level, like if you're not trying to get in the mood right then, if you're just trying to figure out if you like, do I like this person? I can't actually tell. Noticing when people become special interests, like when intellectual or logical puzzles around, like you're spending time thinking about some kind of puzzle around emotions and fixated on a person, like that can be a clue that you might not understand in the moment or recognize that what you're experiencing is an infatuation or desire, but those are things that might say, hey, like, I mean, what do I feel about this person? How is my body reacting around this person? And it's not necessarily going to be in the moment. It could be like 3 hours later. And that's the other thing. Because so many of us have delayed processing, it's not just noticing how you feel in the presence of someone, because you might not feel anything in the presence of someone. If your circuits get overloaded, you might feel nothing. It might be the absence of emotion. Mm-hmm. But then 3 hours later or that night, having very vivid dreams or having a strong physical response or being kind of restless and itchy, because you also have to learn what desire feels like in your body, and that's individual for everyone. Emily Nagoski, her book, Come As You Are, absolutely excellent. And it's written for women, but I think that it's just as valuable for men. in terms of understanding the ways in which desire is tied to our stress response, and how there's an accelerator and a brakes that everybody has in terms of our nervous system. And if you have your foot on the brake and the accelerator at the same time, you're not going anywhere. So you have to actually not just try and press the accelerator, you have to release the brake. So, I mean, if you like car metaphors, she gives a very understandable one.
Something else you mentioned in the webinar is that autistic bodies are contained ecosystems. I'd like to learn a little bit more about this metaphor and what are the critical things you think our ecosystems need to feel good?
So I'm a gardener, and that's one of my special interests. So that is totally like, but when you are a gardener, one of the things you learn pretty quickly as you commit mass genocide and kill tons of plants, which is how you become a good gardener, is that the atmosphere impacts plants thriving. That it's not just like I can go to the store and they will tell me, and I can say, I want a blueberry bush. And they'll give you a blueberry bush, and you will follow the directions on the little tag, and you will have blueberries. Like, that's not going to happen. Or, I mean, it might happen one in 50 times. But the soil matters, the air matters, the wind, how the wind is going, the amount of light, the time of the light, the minerals in the soil, the specific location, like how close it is to a fence and what direction the fence is. Humidity, rainfall, pests, like all of, is there a cat that comes through when you're sleeping and pees on your blueberry bush? Like the cause and effect is always going to be murky. And it's murky for all humans, right? In terms of thriving and producing what we're capable of. But autistic people are more sensitive to the other factors in the ecosystem, I think, than a lot of neurotypical folks. That's one of the core pieces of our neurology is our brains are overconnected. So when like a typical baby brain development is that baby's born with more synapses. Don't quote me. I think it's more synapses than they will need, and then they start to die off. So basically, opportunities for connection. Babies' brains are born very like ready to go, and then depending on the culture and the situation and the atmosphere and the context in which they are developing, different synapses will atrophy and die off. Okay, so it's synaptic pruning is what the neuroscientists call it. So basically it's like your brain's born overconnected, and then you're like, okay, I don't need to listen to every single sound in the world. I just need to prioritize like human voices. So I'm going to let all of these synapses that just hear everything die off, and I'm going to strengthen this one that filters for mom's voice. And that's going to impact my hearing because I'm going to prioritize human voices over other things. And then I'm not going to have as strong a startle response because I live in a city with sirens and things like that. So my brain is telling me those things are actually not, those don't have to be prioritized because they're not a direct threat. So it's like you're learning what's important. Mom's voice is important. The siren that goes off regularly because you were close to the fire station doesn't actually impact your life. You can ignore that and tune it out. Autistic brains remain overconnected. So we don't learn to filter in the same way. And that impacts every aspect of our life because it just means we're more sensitive. And if we're going to tune something out, we basically have to just like intentionally ignore it, which is really, really different. Like teaching your brain to ignore things is different from having it automatically filter. It's different in terms of the energy that it takes. And it's different in that you can't there's like when your brain is automatically filtering, there's also all these little catches in there that are like, okay, ignore the siren unless the siren is getting louder as it comes to your house. For us, we can either ignore everything or we can experience everything. And it's not the same for every person. And the level to which we experiencing that can change even over the course of a day, depending on how tired we are or what else has happened. But we are like high maintenance plants. We are sensitive to changes in the humidity level, and this is metaphorical, right? Like, we're sensitive to all of these different things in our environment that other people may not even, they aren't even necessarily going to notice. In terms of how to support ourselves, I think we definitely need to cultivate mindfulness. So we need to cultivate awareness of how we're feeling and learn to identify the sensations in our own bodies that signal signs of unwellness. So I wear loop earplugs from the time I get up in the morning until I go to bed at night, all day. And they just filter out the highest and lowest frequencies. And I had no idea how much of my exhaustion and anxiety was coming from sound until I started wearing it. I would have said I was a little hard of hearing because I didn't know I had sensory challenges. I didn't know I was hearing more than other people because nobody ever told me what was normal to hear. I just knew I couldn't understand what people were trying to tell me, in crowded, loud spaces, and that I had to ask people to repeat themselves a lot, and that if I was somewhere loud, then probably the next day I wasn't going to be able to leave the house. I didn't know why, and I didn't know how to accommodate that because I didn't know what was happening. But once I realized, so I watched Taylor Heaton, Mom on the Spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So Taylor Heaton, Mom on the Spectrum, she did this video on all the different sensory toys and things that she tried. And that was early in my autism journey. And I was like, let's see what happens. And it was during the pandemic and I was bored. So I ordered everything she mentioned. And I was like, I'm going to try it on. And I didn't think I was like, noise canceling headphones. There's no noise in my house. I am all by myself. It's just me, the cats, and the dog. And I put them on and I had this visceral, really strong reaction. And I felt like I was going to cry because I had not realized that I heard the lights. I heard the neighbor mowing their lawn 3 houses down. I heard the refrigerator. I heard the dog barking 4 houses over. I heard everything. And there's an airport not far from my house. I heard everything. And I didn't realize the toll that was taking. Mindfulness, experimentation, figuring out ways to pull your brain and body together. Acupuncture is really good for me. It helped me find a resting state. And then once I learned, and it helped me teach my body how to regulate itself. Because once my body started learning what it felt like to be regulated, once I started learning and really kind of got that knowledge at a physical level, then I could tell when I was getting dysregulated and I could stop whatever I was doing. And it wouldn't be like when it first happened, but it would be earlier than it had ever been before.
And lastly, how can our listeners learn about you and the Autistic Self-Reliance Support Network beyond this interview?
You can check my website, which is shannanpalma.com, SHANNANPALMA.com, or you can visit autisticselfreliance.org, and that has the sign up for our newsletter and any webinars that we might be putting on or anything like that.
Well, Dr. Palma, thanks so much for making time to speak with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on what is a social construct of gender that doesn't make any sense to you. Once again, thanks so much to Dr. Palma for the conversation, and to learn about Dr. Palma and the Autistic Self-Reliance Network, Check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Here at Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what has worked for them and about the things they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients and then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get you the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone else you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.